cloud. So it'll come up with a message. So just to let everyone know, this is recorded. I think what we might be doing is putting it onto YouTube, but with a link that only people who attend can go. But if everybody's very quiet and things, I don't think Zoom shows people who've attended, unlike MS Teams. So it could be that we might be able to share this. Depends on how it goes. But because it's a nice small group, it might be really good to get you interacting with me a bit more, talking to me, please. But you can interact through the chat or through just shouting out. At the moment, there's only, this is testing my counting abilities, 5 of us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if you count me too. A couple more people might come in later, or they might catch up later. I'm not sharing anymore. I am sharing. I need to set up my screen, my details. So I've got my cloud. I've got lots of things in my cloud. So I'm just going to do the new project and follow my own instructions. So I just need to copy these bits to install my packages, which will take a bit of time, won't they, to do. The deploying the project takes a bit of time. So while we're doing this as well, I'll introduce myself first of all. I'm Zoë Turner. I always forget this bit. This is like the most important thing, isn't it, to introduce yourself? I'm a data scientist at Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust, which provides services, or who provides services for mental health and community health. There's a lot of services that we provide across Nottingham, Nottinghamshire, and a little bit beyond as well. While I talk, I'm just going to do that too. And so I deliver training for NHSR community. I have done on a volunteer basis, and this is specifically for the Midlands Decision Support Network, on introduction to R&R Studio. And I felt that, and I guess other people have as well, that we only really briefly cover RMarkdown as a really tiny section, and I never feel like we do it enough justice. So I wanted to do a little bit more for it, and I based this course around a combination of the slides from Alison Hill, who used to work for our studio, which is now Posit, and another NHSR community kind of volunteer person called Hansel Palencia, who I think is going to do the workshop. I'm not sure because he has a different style to me. So definitely check that one out at the conference. If you haven't signed up already, the NHSR Community Conference is on in the first 2 weeks of November, and there's tons of things, virtual and in person, with R and Python. It's like so much stuff. I signed up to everything in a fit of excitement, really. So it's very exciting. Let me just do this, use this as well, and set that off. And do I want a new? Just do that, I think. Just do that. Oh, let me see. Yep, shall we delete? Yeah. Save. And there you've got a link in the chat for the conference events as well. So they're all free to attend. All the workshops are online, and the talks are between being online and virtual. Nope, that's the same, isn't it? Online and in person, but I think the in-persons will be recorded as well to be viewed online later, or during, as it were. So I've got that set up for myself now. Can I just make sure? I know there are a few thumbs up, just everybody else is okay and have set up in your RStudio Cloud, and that you can see the screen and everything as well. Any problems, just shout out and we'll get those sorted. All good. That's really good. Kind of throws me when things work out technically wise, because, oh, it says no. Oh, I'd never seen that one on the little icons. Okay, so just to refer back to the Introduction to R&R Studio course, this is the link. I'll share that for the particular section on RMarkdown. I'm not sure if anybody's made that course or would be interested. They maybe just came straight to RMarkdown. That's fine. The thing that we show, or I show, and other people do for this, is to get to the template in RMarkdown. And then we show a couple of examples with a few more details. What we're going to do over the next couple of days is go into a bit more detail on these. So I've done setting up, haven't I? Let's just see, setting up. Let's make that big. Here we go. So I adapted these slides, particularly from Alison Hill, and Hansel Palencia has a different style. As I said, he does more worksheets and scripts and follows them through, but I followed some of the great things that he put into his course and combined the two together for this 1 day course, which actually I've split over 2 days because it gives people a bit of a break to sort of consolidate the things that you've learned. So we're actually going to work up to this lunch break, which will be this morning, which will be lunch. And then tomorrow we'll pick up in the morning the second half of this course day. So the first section today will be about breaking down all the sections of what an RMarkdown is and what the capabilities are, and setting up some of the RStudio system so that it can be helpful, sort of navigating some of the really nice features which fit with RMarkdown. And tomorrow will be a little bit more coding. So we'll be doing more things, as they call it, command line. So really taking some of the function of RMarkdown into code. So as you saw as I was setting up, that just as a kind of like a, oh, I can't move my screen. Move Zoom. Zoom takes over. My mouse. I can't control my mouse. Okay. Let's do it that way. Yeah, got it. Finally, it just moves stuff over where I'm trying to click. Stop it. What I did in this section here was to use code. So you can, there are features within RStudio where you can click and drop, and it's the same for RMarkdown, but we're going to do a bit more of that kind of coding bit to speed things up and to make it even more powerful. But I'm going to start with what is RMarkdown? What do you think it is? There are 7 options here, and you can choose more than one. I'd like you to either shout out, you can talk to me, you feel free to talk to me, or put it into the chat as well. Just to go through maybe what you think it is. Is it an authoring framework for data science? Is it a document format, specifically .rmd? Is it an R package named RMarkdown? Number 4 is a file format for making dynamic documents with R. I do feel like I'm saying lots of words here, like they just don't know. Lots of words have been thrown out here. A tool for integrating prose, code, and results, a computational document, or just plain wizardry. And so just choose what you think it could be. Don't worry if it's just to kind of like get an idea as well. See if you have used because if you've used RMarkdown, you're probably going to put 7. I'd put 7, just as a hint. I'm not going to move on until somebody puts a number down. Go on, put a number down. I can see you out the corner of my eye, Lucy. You can see it at the keyboard. 7. Dave got there with 7. All 7, sorry, all 7, not just number 7. All 7. That's cool. That's a good way of saying that. It's good. Cover all options. A combination of them. 4. Number 4. Right. Number 6. Is that everybody who's answered? I think that is, because I think that's everyone who's answered. Let's go to the next slide. And actually, yeah, it's 1 to 6, but really there's a bit of wizardry as well. So this came from Alison Hill, and so she's given links to each of the sections, which then go to the specific parts. So RMarkdown is really difficult to train, particularly in an introduction to R and RStudio, because it's so many things and it's so expansive, really. So when you go through the introduction to R and RStudio, you learn about RStudio, you learn about some of the really powerful packages like dplyr for manipulating code data, I should say, rather than code, and ggplot2 for visualizations. And then we go to RMarkdown, and it's an extension of those 2 things, but then it's everything else, which it's a lot of stuff with a bit of wizardry as well, because it just feels like it's magic sometimes. I'm going to show some of this magic, so we're going to get started. Checked first, I've done that already. I kind of was ahead of myself. Everybody's fine, they're on the cloud. Oh, we're not on MS Teams. Formatting is very, very specific in some parts of the RMarkdown code scripts. I think it might be lost also in Zoom. So when I put it in, it's whether it's got tab spaces or what do they call them? Spaces. They're very, very particular, and it might be lost. So I'll try and share the slides as well, so that then you can get the code directly, because it's very pedantic, it's particular. So what we will do, see, I've got slides that help me do this. So I'm going to pull out my own. I'm going to switch it around, actually, sorry. I prefer it the other way around. It's just a weird thing. It's not a major thing, right? But so today, together, we're going to find the RMarkdown template. So it was something that Chris Bealey said around the Shiny apps. If you ever want to go into Shiny apps or have heard about it, because there's quite a lot of features within these tools, his suggestion is always to start with a template so that you don't write it from scratch. You know it works. It's kind of set to, so that it's out of the box and it will just work. And where it is on your RStudio is in a couple of places. I think if you go to File, New File, you have this very long, well, it's not really long. It's a very filling. There's a lot of options is what I'm trying to say. And you're looking for RMarkdown ... Now, surprisingly, I made that with my mouse, but I tend to go to the short menu underneath it, which is where you've got a green circle with a white cross, which goes straight to that option. And because I can't really navigate my mouse very often. And you can go to RMarkdown ... usually signifies there's a wizard coming. If you have clicked that, that's fine. Just hold there. And I just wanted to point out that Quarto is also something that you might be hearing about a bit more now. We're not covering that today. And we might cover it in the future. I haven't done anything with Quarto myself yet, but as soon as I do, I'd probably want to share it. It's kind of like the next version, the next generation of RMarkdown, but RMarkdown isn't really going anywhere just yet. So Quarto was sort of being worked on and then released at a recent RStudio, and they also changed their name to Posit because they're broadening they have broadened their horizons, but they're trying to get their names in line with their extension to other languages. So Quarto is really exciting for people who are outside of R, who want to use the benefits of RMarkdown. So it's really good for people like Python users and Julia, I think it is, and some other languages where they can access the great things that RMarkdown offer, but without having to use R. I'm going to teach you about RMarkdown because they're very similar, but also RMarkdown has lots of support systems out there. So at the moment, people are working through lots of the things with Quarto. It's being developed, and it will probably be something that's really big that we'll use in the future. But at the moment, I'm going to get you started with RMarkdown, just so that you know, because you'll start hearing this when you're in the world of R. You'll be like, what's Quarto? Why didn't we cover that? It will be there in the future. Stop talking, go to the wizard. Oops, I need to install a package. You probably clicked yes. If you didn't, just click it. And then you come to this wizard. It'd be just interesting to know, because there's only a few of us, thumbs up if you've ever seen this wizard before, or if you've had an RMarkdown from a colleague before, you've opened it, you've ventured into this area. So one person has seen this, 2 people have, and a couple of people, this is like very new. Brilliant, that's excellent. So if you're not familiar with R generally, or RStudio specifically, things are always being developed. So there's a few things within this wizard which have changed recently because there is newer versions of RStudio. On the cloud, you have the newest version of RStudio. So we have the title, which you'll be familiar with if you have seen this before, the author, but they've now updated the date function because people always put their dates in their report. So I think they've added this to it. I think you used to be able to write the date in the format that you wanted, but now you can use current date when rendering a document, which means that every time you run your document to produce your report, it puts in the current date. So it's a bit of code. We'll see it in a bit, and it just runs it. So it's automated. It's a nice feature to keep it all automated. You've got 3 options. We're going to go with HTML because that works really well on most people's computers to run it, to see it, and also to share. PDF sometimes needs something on your computer, and Word also comes out in a format that I can see myself frowning here. It comes out okay, but you might want to change the fonts and the styles, which needs another language coinciding with it. So it works. It just probably needs a bit more to make it look nice. So we're just going to go with HTML because it's quite nice. But just to point out up here as well, there are other options with RMarkdown. I think that's the thing with it. It's so expansive in what it can do. You can also create an empty document, which I've only just realized there was a button there for, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to click on OK to get all of the stuff in it. Now, mine gets a bit squashed. The other thing I wanted to do was just change it. If it's okay with everybody, please say if it's not. I'm going to change it so that it's dark mode and make the text a bit bigger so that you can view that. I'm going to go to Tools and Global Options, and you can do this as well if you're on your own computer or on your own cloud. And I'm going to go to Appearance, make the editor font 12 so it's nice and big, and move it to Tomorrow Night for a black screen with text. As I say, if this isn't visible to you very well, please do say, privately or otherwise, and I'll change it back. It's just I find that easier, but I want this to be viewed nicely on your screens, because sometimes it looks very different when you're on different screens like laptops and things. Okay, so has everybody in that preamble got an untitled RMD file on their screen? Thumbs up, or got 1, 2? I have to be quick and check these. 3. Is everybody? 4. Yay. 5. Yay. Full house. Wonderful news. Okay. So this is an RMarkdown. If I just do this one at the top, which is an R script, which you may be more familiar with, just wanted to point out that they've got 2 slightly different symbols on them. So you've got the R for R script on the untitled 2, and it's tiny and it's a red circle with RMD written on it. You get different buttons underneath it in RStudio. So you get different options. So the options you have for scripts, pretty minimal. The options you have for RMarkdown are more expansive. I'm going to use that word a lot today, I feel. And we're going to just knit. So knit is also known as render, which means to create, really. And it's symbolized by the knit, as it says in words, but it also has a ball of wool with some knitting needles sticking out of it. If you just click on the button, you have to save the file. Now, let me know if it doesn't work, because this is on the cloud, and whether you have, it should work. I'm just going to call it my report. If you're on your own computer, it needs to save to a place where you can still write to it. So it will probably be your C drive maybe, or if you work on a network drive, it might be slower, but it might be some personal drive that you have. The reason why it needs to save is because this is not your final report. Oh, I'll just move it. It's very quick. Your final report saves next to it. So the RMD file is what's on the left, which you can see is a script. And then if you've got your files opened, you can see your files at the bottom. It says my report, which is what's just popped up on the right, which is your HTML file. No questions, no issues with that. It's all work technically wise, because sometimes the technical issues get thrown up around this time. Great. So as I said before, this is a template which just runs, and it's pretty ugly, but it's just to show that it works. So if you inherit an RMarkdown script from somebody, or if you build something yourself, and you might build something quite complicated and it doesn't work very well, or it doesn't do what you expected, using these just checks to see, does it actually work on your computer? It doesn't use any packages. It doesn't rely on anything for the plots. These are not ggplot. These are base R plots. And the data is available to it through base R. And it doesn't need anything. So you can sort of debug by going, right, well, this works. So RMarkdown works on my computer. Next, I can introduce these packages, and then I can introduce my code, and just work through all your errors, if you have errors, to see what's going on with your files. And that's why it's super quick as well, because it's not relying upon anything. Oh, look at this. Okay, what I would like you to do now is, oh, my project's not worked, has it? I'm looking for some other files in this section. And am I in the right section? I'm just wondering if you can see 01 bake-off report, or if that's just me not seeing what I should see. This is the technical problem when it comes to my own screen. So can everybody?
I can't see it either.
No. Okay. Oh, I can see your. Nope, that's somebody else. Where am I? Oh, I'm not in my own workspace. Where am I? So the date is the 18th of October. It'll be that one. Let's have a look. No, I'm not seeing anything, am I? That's interesting. Oh, because it restarted, didn't it? Okay, so I'll write the code in to share, because it's nicely done in that it's code. If I can find my code. Technical issues. RMarkdown. Pre-work. Let me just check. So that's the code to install the packages we're going to use today. I'm just going to see if I've actually done anything by looking for them. Oh, I might have actually done my packages. Okay. That's interesting. Tidyverse. That seems to be there. So I've got my packages. So I got that much of my code right, but I've shared that with you just in case. And then this should download. Should. Oh, maybe. What did I do then? So I want to delete the zip. So that worked out. I agree. So where are the files? Save workspace to .rdata. Save. Has anybody got the files at all? I seem to have messed up my code somehow.
Mine works, Zoe, but I've got mine on my local setup.
And it worked?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And that code worked? I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so this is an sorry, I'm debugging now the cloud. So what have I done? Oh, maybe it's in our data. Oh. So if you click on the .rdata file, what does that do? No. Oh. Load to cloud. Oh, well, this is right, slightly different option then. I'm not sure why the cloud's not showing it. It's interesting that it worked. I'm so pleased that you're here and you've done it on your own computer and that worked, because that helps me feel better, really. RMarkdown. Let me see. So how have I done this? Use RMarkdown. Oh, I have moved it as well. So, oh, I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm very confused about this, where the data has got to. And I'm kind of like thrown on this. So, because I moved it over from my account to NHSR community, and I wonder if then I've messed up my own code, but I didn't think I did anything with it. So if I change it to RMarkdown, no, is it in there? RMarkdown basics, maybe it's not in there. No, I haven't done that, have I? What have I done to the code? And why is it working on your own computer? Let me do this. I was looking at the wrong place, wasn't I? RM_1. Right, basics. So I must have left it in there. So code downloads it. Let's see if I can copy the link address and put that into. So if you click on that link that I've just shared into the chat, you should, let me know if this doesn't do it, save a zip file into your downloads. It's quiet, so I'm hoping that's happened. I'm just opening mine up so I can see it somewhere, but of course it's gone somewhere behind my Zoom, I think. Let me see. You can see my screen, and I've got downloads, and I've got my file. So has everybody downloaded something called RM_01? Everybody? Anybody? Got one person. Good. So really, you just should click on that link and it should just do it automatically, but it might not do because it's through the web. And people might have GitHub blocked. Ooh, that's an interesting. No, I'm not on the VPN. Right, so that's 2 people. 3. Moragua. Brilliant. Okay, so when we're in, if you go back to your RStudio Cloud, I think if you go to, I've got to remember the symbols. Make this big. Get rid of that. It might be more. No, where is it? There's an upload button. There's a whole button for upload. If you click on upload in the file section in the bottom right hand corner of the RStudio panes, upload, you should get this target directory as cloud, but you don't want that. You should browse to your downloads. No, cancel. I need to choose file, sorry, not browse. I always forget, choose files. You can see pictures there, which is lovely. And then I'm going to download to the zip file. Is everybody okay with that? Let me know if you've lost and it's not there. And then I'm going to click OK. And I've got my basic files. I wonder if I can unzip them. Oh, let me see if I can unzip them. I don't think I can. I think actually I'm going to have to do something else with them, aren't I? Sorry, if I just, can I move these? Let's see if I can move it. I'm not sure if I can move more than one thing. You can move things around in this section too, which is an interesting insight into how you can do things, but I think we can move those into the project. Oh, it can, it just moves them. Aha. Did everyone see what I just did then? I wasn't sure it would work, so I wasn't really explaining it. So I went into the zip file, selected everything, and then moved it up to the main section of project where it should be, because all of the code that I've written relates to that pathway, that file pathway. Please let me know if there's any of those steps that you've missed or it didn't work. What you should see in your bottom right hand pane now with your files is all of these myriad of files along with something that you just created just a few minutes ago with your template, like my report or something. Thumbs up if that's there. I mean, David, you're really lucky because it all worked, which is great. But this might be an insight into how you can move things around on the cloud if you ever need the cloud. Is everybody okay? I'm going to have to look into that bit of code. It's gone quiet. I'm hoping everyone's not run off. How do I move again? So you just click your files, you're selecting them, and then there's more as a button, gives you a short menu, and it's 3 down, move ... and then it gives you the option where to move it to. Mine's a bit silly because I'm already there, but you're looking to put it into the project. Oh, you've got your thumb up as well. Great, great. So it's 2 people, 3 with David already being okay. Dave, and is it Fikri? Comes up as your name. Are you okay? Yep, Dave's okay. Fikri, you with us? Is it sorted? I'm just so sorry that this didn't work the first time. I'm just pausing just to see. You might have just gone off for a cup of tea. I don't blame you if you have. We will have breaks as well, because we will need one after this technical glitch. I'm going to move on. I'm hoping that you're there. Please do say if something isn't working or you're needing it again. So now we can see the files. What I would like to do after all of that is go back to my thing. I want you to have a bit of a turn anyway yourselves. I want you to open up 01 bakeoffreport.rmd, which is in mine, it's about 5 down. And I want you to just have a look at the data in there, the coding, and just have a guess at what's metadata, what would be text, what would be code, and have a go with the output, just to give you a little hint. That's the knitted document, and have a look through that. And if it was easy, try and find the code that produces the plot. I'm going to be here, but be quiet for 2 minutes to give you some space to play around with that. Feels like it's on countdown. 5, 4. Okay. Did anybody encounter any problems or discover anything or wanted to share anything? Any problems with files generally? Okay, right. We'll go through it anyway. So I will open up the file, which was this one. And it opens up in its new tab. I'm just going to get rid of that untitled one. So we're going to look at the source for the file together. So the metadata kind of falls into a few areas, a couple of areas really. I've got this top section, which looks different to this section here from lines 8 to 12, which is also different from this bit. So there's kind of, on my screen anyway, you might be able to see that there's like a grayed area and then a black area, but then this is kind of denoted at the very top with these 3 dashes, and on either on the top chunk, the top line, so 1, and also at the bottom on 6. So the metadata for it's kind of like metadata in my head is this section up here, which is from 1 to 6, which is always at the top of an RMarkdown script. If we just go back to that original one, we can see it's up here as well, where we had the wizard for the template that we put in the details of the title, the output, the parameters is what param stands for, and series, which is some coded bit that we've added in previously. So this is the metadata. This is saying this is an RMarkdown script, and this is what you need to do with this RMarkdown script. The text section, which may or may not be quite obvious, it's a bit difficult because what's happened here in the text is it's actually been mixed with some code. So this is text, which is white text, and then we've got code within the white text part, which looks blue. And it's denoted with this R section, which says that this is an R bit. We will go into that a bit more. But just to kind of make it very clear, this is the text section. And so, oh, if I could type, and you're just writing like you would do in Word. The code bit, which is confusingly part of your text, is also in these bits here, which we call chunks, which are grayed out. So there's a lot of mixing and matching for things in terms of the code and the text. But the very top part, the metadata, is precise, and it's not mixed in that way yet. So this is code in a chunk, which is grayed out, and it's got 3 back ticks to denote it at the beginning, and these curly brackets with some more codey bits in it. And then at the very end of it, you've got these 3 back ticks again. So if you remove those, it makes the whole section into a code section. Is that clear? Because I don't feel like I've actually explained that all that well. I kind of like jumped around the screen. I want to see if you have any questions. That's perfectly reasonable given how I'm jumping around. Great. And the output, which is the next stage. If I click on knit, which is with the ball of wool with the knitting needles, this should be the output that you get, which looks a little bit in terms of the text. So you can see it a bit more clearly. Oh, you can see this is a text section I've written, and that's what's output. It won't be on yours because I just wrote that before I did the change. But now you can see this is series is written there, and then some parts change. And then you get your chart, which is nice. I can't control my mouse. Right, so if I just minimize that. Okay, so RMarkdown combines lots of things together. So this is a nice image from Alison Horse, who was their resident artist at our studio a few years ago, I think. And she still does a lot of drawings around statistics and R concepts. She's a professor, I think, in academia, and she tries to make these concepts friendly with these nice cartoon images. And this one particular one is these 2 little creatures creating what looks like, from a cauldron pot with all sorts of things, adding text, code, knitting it, a bit of magic, and celebrate perceived wizardry, it says on the recipe. And then it comes out with this fancy report with a couple of charts and text and code. And this is really summing up what RMarkdown does in an image. And that's the end of that very, very brief overview. Was that the setting up? Any questions? It's all working out for everybody, technically wise? Good. Right, we'll just go through what's inside RMarkdown in a bit more detail, because there's a bit more. So we're going to kind of break it down smaller and smaller and smaller. It feels like we're starting big and then going down. I would like you to think of or reply, what does how does it work? Sorry, not what does it, how does it work? What do you think? The little emoji image for, I don't know, number one. I press knit, a document appears, and I believe that anything happens in between could be actual magic, kind of harking back to that picture. Or number three, knitr executes the code and converts .rmd to .md. Pandoc renders the .md file to the output format you want. That sounds like a lot of words. 1, 2, or 3, or more than one. It could be 3 and or 2 and or all of them, just to get your view on what you think it could be that's driving it in the background. So we've got 2 and 3. Bit of magic in there. I like that. And a knitr thing. 2. There's a full-on magic choice there. Going for that 3. 3 and 1. And I'm not sure. Oh, I'm not sure Fikri's here. So I'm very much like that and 2. But yes, it's actually, yes, it's a lot of confusion. There's definitely the 3, and there was a link to this to, I think this was Alison Horst, as she's changed her name for Halloween. So she herself said it's like magic, and that was her tweet. So it does feel like that. This is the actual thing that happens, but you can definitely use RMarkdown without knowing all of this. You just need to know that the steps are that you need to save your file for it to run, to then be able to place the output file somewhere. But the moving to RMD to that's the truth, but you just stick to magic, makes it much easier. And we just all accept that. Even people who are really very au fait, I was going to say, very into RMarkdown and understanding all the mechanics underneath it, they still feel like it's magic. So a bit more about metadata, because it's fair to say this is metadata at the top, but what is going on? The code looks different. When I do this in our introduction to R&R Studio, it's quite clear what's code, it's quite clear what's output, and then this thing called YAML comes along. YAML itself is an acronym, which might be something that's a backronym. I think they might have worked backwards from it. I'm not entirely sure. I've heard it called yet another markup language, and this one's YAML ain't markup language. So markup language, if people are familiar, you might not be. I was introduced to it through RMarkdown. It's used in notation apps like Notion and Obsidian, where people code the text formatting, for example, and links, but it's all in code, and it's kind of universal and agnostic. Whereas if you're using Microsoft Word, you use Microsoft Word's view on the world, in a sense, and it works very well with Microsoft products, but it doesn't move between other ones. So these notation apps rely upon Markdown, which is also what RMarkdown is based upon. And the sections here, as this is a key, so it's code, the red word with the colon denoting it, that is the key, and the value then goes into that. So the first bit in the title is a string, so that can be the words, it's text. And the output, which is quite key within an RMarkdown file, what do you want it to look like when you knit it? In white here, we're putting in that input, that value, sorry, I should say, as HTML document. And we've got other various output options. Oh, that was the option. So we've got HTML, sorry, we've got the basic YAML, which we chose to be HTML because it works really well. It can be read, it's very accessible as well. So it's great for both the user creating it and also people reading it. If I just explain, it's self-contained. So if I were to email my report.html, just that to you, you would be able to open it in, you have to be careful about this, Edge and Chrome, maybe Firefox, I'm not sure about that one, but not Internet Explorer. So Internet Explorer is a bit of a problem for the NHS employees in the room, or people who may be NHS people that you might send this to, because that might be their default browser. Unfortunately, they shouldn't be using it anymore, but we still rely upon it in many organizations for other clinical systems that still rely upon it. So it might be that you send this, which should work, and somebody comes back to you and says it doesn't work, and it's because the browser is not the right browser. what am I doing? Save output options in your YAML. So you can extend some of these options as well. I was just looking at this one. So this is the basic that comes out on the left, and then you can add options that relate to the HTML to make it interactive. Now, the other great thing about HTML is it's interactive, whereas Word and PDF are static reports. You can't move around within them as easily, certainly not through our Markdown output. But for example, if I put in, let me just, because I have to be very precise, I'm just going to copy the code because it won't work otherwise. Take away those sections, because I have to get these sections just before, like the tab spaces, and I can never get that right, so I've just copied it. If I knit it, I'll share the code with you so you can have a go yourself. So that's the code, and this is the slide which you should be able to copy it from. What we can see at the top here is a TOC, which is a table of contents, and that table of contents has been switched on. It says true. And unlike if you are familiar with our products, our language, dplyr, you can write true in little, and I think you can write true in capitals as well. It's not R that you're working with here, so it doesn't need the uppercase and lowercase in the same way. I don't think T works though. T doesn't work either. Okay, true. So you can have a go. I've shared some of that code with you already, but I would like you to add a floating table of contents. So that's a table of contents that I think was fixed. And I want you to add a theme. So the answers are on the next slide. But there was another way I found out how to get the information now, and I've completely forgotten, because there are help files in the bottom right-hand corner. And is it knit R? I always forget this bit, and I should remember it. It might be HTML output. So I'm going to just give you 3 minutes to have a look yourselves, and I'll be looking to find the help file to get this information for a floating table of contents. But you've got the link there to slide 8. On slide 9 is the answer. So you can follow that while I'm looking. Oh. Found it. So sorry to interrupt, but I did RMarkdown in the help. No, I didn't. How did I find it? I found it now, I've completely forgotten. Ooh. There you go, RMarkdown, HTML. Let's try that. It says there. Right, sorry about that. I don't read my own slides. I was looking frantically for the help file and it was on the slide. But from this, I hope you can see how actually it's quite difficult to find the help things in terms of YAML, not R. So if you're not familiar with the help section, it's quite useful if you wanted to write things like, so in dplyr, there's a function called summarize. So if I put that summarize in, it looks for the various options that you've got. So there are different packages that have something quite similar. So it just throws out what it could be, a bit like a Google. And then we've got dplyr summarize. But if I look for HTML output, I get something that doesn't look like what I'm looking for here, which is RMarkdown. And I think that's the confusing part of it. So sorry about that. I didn't read my own slides, but I did show the example of how difficult it is to find help when it comes to YAML. So that's something that's a bit of a downside, really. But the answers are here. I'll see if that goes into the format in the. Well, it does look like it keeps the format in Zoom. So what we've got in here is HTML TOC is true. If I go, what I'm doing in the console as well is, because I've typed this previously, I'm going to use the arrow key up. If people have done coding previously, you might be familiar with this. If not, this is just, it's like magic. You can scroll through your previous entries into the console. Everything that you write, obviously, I say obviously in a script, and sometimes in your RMarkdown, if you run it within your RMarkdown, not render it to an extra sort of like report thing, you can scroll through your previous up and down code. So I will select that to open it up. And there we go, we've got TOC underscore float equals false. So it's switched off normally. But if I put that under TOC underscore float, float colon space true. And the secret is also to make a change, and this works for all code, and then run it just to see if it works. And it's very, very important for RMarkdown because you can break things. I can't seem to copy contents from the chat. Oh, that's very strange. Can you see the slides though? So I can always share the slide itself. And if you open that in the browser, you, I hope, should be able to read that. I don't know. It's interesting. I've never seen that with Zoom. That's probably a Zoom thing, and it could be something to do with security. That seems very sophisticated. Let's see, that worked with the float. What did it look like? Sorry, I was distracted, and that's my own. I'm looking for this one, aren't I? So it's now over on the side. This isn't a really long report, but if I try and make it smaller, I cannot control my mouse. This happens every time. So if I try and make this a bit smaller, so I make it super small and then scroll down, you can see it moves on the left side. So it follows it. It always stays, it's floating. So if you have a really, really, really long report, your table of contents moves with you rather than always staying at the top as it would do in Word, for example. So that's the interactive part of it that's quite useful. I'm going to use theme here, just copy it from the slide, and Flatly was just one of the options. I think if I look for Flatly, so I'm looking within the help file here. Maybe it's not there as an option. We've got these themes here, one of the following. I think there are various themes you can use. Doesn't say anything there, does it? Let's see what Flatly looks like. Knit. And it just changes the colors here, actually. That's quite nice. And the blues, so it's a nice way of just applying a color theme without having to code it yourself. So that change, I quite like that. That's nice. And then this one, which is a really nice button, just added in for a little bit of pizzazz. Code download true, and then knit that one. And then there's this little button that appears at the top right of your report. And if you select that down, download RMD. If I click that, it's very quick. And I get the code that's been used. This is in my own system. This is my own, confusingly, my own RStudio, which looks exactly like the cloud. And I just downloaded the same file. So I get all the code. So that's really nice if you're sending reports to people. And I've done this myself, like several years later, someone says, can you rerun that and update it? And you're like, where did I save my code again? That's several years old, is that project? That keeps the code with it. Just have to be careful if you do, and you shouldn't really do this. So, but just to be super careful if you have any references to any patient or sensitive data or personal data in there, because if it's in your code, if it's hard coded, people can view that. But this is about the bake-off, so there's no sensitive data in it, but it's just to be careful. But it's really good even for yourself sometimes to go, where's that code? And it's embedded into it. If you don't have that, the code is not with your report. So if these were related to patients, you wouldn't be able to see the data that was underlying it to get to those numbers. I'm not a hacker, but I have had a look to see what you can get in your HTML, and you can't see anything necessarily. You can't see the code unless you explicitly share it. Okay, we've got a few more slides, and then I think it's a break at the end. So we're going to talk about these parameters because these are in the code already. We didn't add them, they were in that RMarkdown before we started. So what is a parameter? I haven't actually asked what people tend to use on a day-to-day basis, but if you're a SQL user, you might have done something at the top of your code script where you sort of set something, usually dates, where you say set this date, and then every time you refer to it within your code, it brings that same date through. I suppose something like that exists in Excel. I was going to say it doesn't, but I suppose you're referring to a cell always. So you can set your parameter, which can change your code. So it sort of reads it at the top and then goes, this is the parameter I require. So that's the code. I'll share that with you well, I'm hoping that I can share that with you again. But not everyone can necessarily copy it. So that's with the parameters at the bottom of the bits that you were writing on. And I'd like you just to change it in the series 1. Now, what you might notice is in this section, it's got quotation marks around it, or yeah, single quotes. So if I put single quotes in, it will run. I think it will run with double quotes as well. I think it's working with both it being a string, which means it's got the quotations around it, so it changes to yellow, or as a number. I'm just going to check it because I can't remember. I think it should work the same. And then I'll go quiet and just leave you to play around with it, change it, run it. If you have any questions, I'm here. Oh, I forgot to say, sorry, it's knit with parameters. So if I just stop that for a minute. Oh, I've started it again. So knit with parameters, I forgot this button. Right next to where you've got the knit button with the ball of wool. So you can either change the code and run it, or you can do the drop down and try knit with parameters. And it's actually that I'd like you to explore thinking about it. But not everybody will be able to view this. I was just reading the error message thing that I got here, because VPNs sometimes block this. So it might just be a grey box, which is a bit awkward. I'll stop talking, let you play with it, see if there's a problem. Look at the code if you can do, if you can't see anything but the grey box, and I'll explain that in a second. Give you 2.5 minutes. Yeah, get the grey box. That's our VPN, Lucy. So if you could come off, I'm not sure if you can, you might be able to circumvent it. And I'll explain to everyone what that is. It's our VPN blocking it because it's a good VPN. So I think because I talked over a bit of that, I'm not going to give you the full time because not everybody has access to this. This grey box that pops up instead of seeing what I can see here is because this is actually accessing the Shiny parts of Shiny development within our studio. And as I sort of mentioned, both Lucy and I work in the same trust. And if we're on our virtual private network, if we're on our network, but from home through the Wi-Fi, for example, it blocks it. So it just makes it gray. So it doesn't say it's broken, it just goes gray. And what you should be able to see is if you change it to 2 and then knit it, and you can change that in code, is, if I just move that over, is you can see it now says series 2 and the numbers have changed in correspondence to series 2 information. What was I going to show you on here? Let me just get my I've got this back to front now, haven't I? So I'm a bit confused. What am I doing? I want this one over here, don't I? Over there, and I wanted that one, was it? Yes, it was. Okay, so you can change that in the series. We won't be able to do that necessarily with Shiny apps. Oh, and so the other thing I wanted to show, that was it, is if you write something that's nonsensical like 200, because I know it's popular, but the Bake Off hasn't had 200 episodes. If we run it and it doesn't exist, that data just fails. So you get it in a separate tab along the bottom quadrant. So the console is what you're more familiar with. Terminal is all about GitHub stuff, so we're not doing that today. And render will give you any errors that you get. So it just says error. Actually, it's not finding a CSV file because underneath each of these sections is a CSV file. What you can see here, just to point out, which is nice, is that anything that you've clicked up here for the knitting, whether you did knit with parameters or just knit straight away, it comes into the console as code. So that's what you can see with the code. Has that worked for everybody else? That's really interesting if you can see it, because quite a lot of people get blocked by their networks. Yeah. Oh, great. You're on your own computer, weren't you, David? So that's good. And Dave, great. Well-deserved break. So if you have any questions from any of that or want clarification on any part, that's great, because there were some technical issues that could have slowed people down. 10 minutes, have a cup of tea, stretch your legs, walk around, and I will leave that on the screen. I'm going to make a cup of tea, but come back, and quite welcome to put things in the chat in the meantime, and I can pick that up. But I'll go quiet for a bit. See you in a bit. Yeah. Okay. Hands up if you're back. If you're not back, hands not up. Let's get an idea of who's here. 1, 2. 2 people. Okay, I'll go on to the next screens anyway, hoping that they'll come back very soon. It's recorded if they're not. So we went through a lot of the code in the last section. Did anybody have any questions that sort of came to them in having a nice break away from the computer? I hope. Sometimes things pop into your head. Okay, cool. So the next bit that we're going to dive into a bit more is text. As I said, people might be familiar, but maybe not with notation apps, because I certainly found out about them after I started coding in RMarkdown. So it's not something that necessarily everybody knows about. But as I sort of referred to briefly, is that the text within Markdown can be altered in terms of sort of like formatting, but within code, in a sense. So the headers are the first part that we can look at. We don't have any in this particular section. I think in the default template there are. So there are 2 here. So that's like a header 2 and a header 1 there. So if I knit that one, actually I should have changed one, and you can see they're sort of that size. They're both the same. And then if I change one to just 1, hash knit that, the top one should be bigger and the second one is smaller. So these are just coded elements of your headers. And in an example here, you've got the things all set out. So I think this is what they're called in Microsoft Word as well, when you highlight them and then select what kind of header you'd like. But in this, with Markdown, you write the code. Is the download of the slides available? Sorry if I've missed it. So these slides that I'm showing, there is a download, but what I'm doing at the moment is sharing them online. So I'm on this slide for text. And the main section is just this kind of the main. So you went through to pre-work, and so all the slides are in there as well. But I do need to work out how so you can save them, because not everybody can access everything, or they might want it on their own computer. So I can sort that out later. Navigating the headers though, because we've got this code that's related to the headers, and you can do this in Microsoft Word too. I think you can, you know, like with a table of contents, you can build them around your headers. You can navigate in RStudio around your headers. And there's a section here called Outline. I think what I've got here is 2 pictures because RStudio has been updated a few times. So when I first took a screenshot, I had just these lines which sort of denote like text. And now they actually have a symbol and a word. I think it's to make it more accessible. So like the knit is a symbol and then it's got knit next to it. So these are very common ones. And outline is in the top part of your top left pane of your RStudio with in your RMarkdown, so it won't appear in a script, but you've got this kind of, oh, I don't know if you got it in scripts. The outline, if you click on it, you get these options of headers. You won't have that in the bake-off report because they don't, oh yes you do, sorry, you do have headers, major headers. I don't know how I didn't see that before. I am not reading things today, so I am sorry. They were clearly there, it says header there. Formatting the text, so you might want to do things like making them bold or italic. Interesting, underlined is not available because it's not so accessible for people. So you can do it in Markdown, but it's not easy to do. And I can't remember how to do it necessarily because it's not easily viewable. So in this example, the code is on this side. So 2 asterisks on either side of words or a word will make them bold. Underline on either side will make it italic. And if you do 3 asterisks, you get bold and italicized, as I think it's called. So if I've got this section here where it says this is the text section, if I highlight text and then do 1 of these asterisks, it then fills it in on the other side. It doesn't overtype, which is a nice feature. I think actually if you do 1, I'm going to just check this. I think that's italic. So 1 will be italicized. If I then highlight it again and do another one, so I've got 2, and then knit it, it's then bold. There we go. It's not that clear, but it is bold, sort of. And what you're doing is coding your formatting of your text. Lots of people, though, have come from a visual editor kind of view, so the Microsoft Word and the other products that you have in Microsoft. And there is now this functionality within RStudio. Now, I don't know if this works on cloud. If it doesn't, I might have to open my own to show you. But in the top left, right, I'm not very good. Top left panel, sorry, left, right, I'm just saying all sorts of things. In the editor function area, you've got source, which is the code we can see. And if you click on visual, I'm wondering if it will work. I get this error, not error, but message, use visual mode. Oh, it does work. It might not work for everybody, and I'm not entirely sure why. If I get rid of the outline, so it gives you a bit more room, you can see you've got even more options along here, and the view changes. So if you scroll down a bit, that's code, so the code is really not touched, but the text is as you would expect it to be. So this is a header. So if I click in it, it says now header 1. If I click into the text section, it says normal in the area and in a view that would be familiar to those who use Microsoft Word, which is quite a lot of us. If I go to the text section, bold is kind of grayed out as a button. If I double click it and then do italicized, it then makes it italicized. If I go back to source, it's got these 3 asterisks. It works going between the 2, but it might not function completely for some of the things like tables. So just be aware of that if you're trying to do something in visual and then go back. You can put in tables, for example, you can insert tables. And I've got a bit muddled working between the 2. I tend to work for just source, but equally you might like visual, which is fine. And if you like it a lot that you want all of your RMarkdown to be like that, in tools and global options. So global will be any project that you ever open. It's a bit funny on the cloud because it is a project, so it's not globally set for the entirety of your cloud, but on your own computer, you're looking at everything that you do. Or if you just do it for your individual projects, you just want this one to be visual, but the next one to be code, you can set it individually. I'm going to go to global options. I always forget where to go. It's on RMarkdown specifically. It's got its own tab setting, and then visual. You can then select use visual editor by default for new documents, meaning that every time you open it, it will be in that view. So you don't need to set it each time, which is nice, a nice feature. There are some other things in there as well, obviously for RMarkdown functionality and updating it and changing it. Just out of interest, does anybody use any of these notation things like Obsidian, or what was the other one I mentioned? Notion. Anybody at all? No? People might be familiar with things like Evernote, that kind of notation thing. It's supposed to sort out your life and do all your to-dos and everything, and I'm not very tidy, so I can't really use that. Brings us to lists, actually, with to-do lists, but in a markdown fashion. It's quite not, I'm going to go back to source code because this is an example of source code. You can do lists very easily, so bulleted lists within your markdown, and it would then translate it to the visual view. And you can use either hashes, not hashes, it's not hashes, it's a hyphen, or an asterisk, and they both come out as whole, like, what would you call them, bullet points, which is, and you can mix and match really, so it doesn't really, it's a bit agnostic. So if I just copy these sections into the sections here, and so you can see that they all merge together. So I've got hyphen and bullets, but if I then knit it, it will just translate them both into solid bullets. So they're just all the same. So it's a bit scruffy, which I am a bit scruffy and messy in my own code, but then when it prints it out, it's all nice and neat. But if you wanted to put in numbers, and some of the difficulties with having numbered bullets is that, you know, you have something new in, you have to renumber them. You can automate that in Microsoft products, but you can also automate it to some extent in Markdown. So I'm going to use the Alt key and my mouse and just highlight down. So instead of highlighting across, which you might be familiar with when you hold your left key of your mouse and scroll across, I've held down Alt so that I can scroll down my list. I've now got this massive cursor, which if I delete that and put 1 in, and I think it's a dot, will work. You can see it's one long thing and it's done it on each line. It's a nice lazy way of coding. And then if I knit that, it should automatically number them. So although it says 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, it's gone 1, 2, 3, 4, which is really nice. I'm just going to take the dot off and see if it works, because I can't really remember if you need the dot, if the dot means that it recognizes it. No, it doesn't. So you need a dot for it to see that. Otherwise, it just thinks it's text. I couldn't remember. I've also got a point, must have a return between the text and the bullet. So if I don't have this space between the front of the text, so this has caught me out many times when I was doing bullets. If you have your sort of like your text bit and then you start with your bullets, it doesn't read it as the start of a bulleted list of any sort. When I knitted that, you can see it sort of squishes it all together. If I remove that cursor, if I go back to putting a return or carriage line between them, it should now do it. So it recognizes it. Now that caught me out so many times, and that happens often between headers as well. So if your header's not coming out, but it looks like it should, just see if you've got enough spaces around it, because that could be the thing. ggplot2 is all about the brackets for me. I'm always getting the brackets in the wrong place. dplyr, it's about commas for me. I always miss that, and the type of and spelling. And in RMarkdown, it's spaces. Is that okay for everybody? Everybody followed that? I'm hoping you're still there. We've got a thumbs up, so there is somebody. Yay. Okay, hyperlinks. Now, what you might also start doing is hyperlinking, and you can hyperlink internally and externally. So you can go out to the web, and you can also go internally to other parts of your documents as well. So it's very powerful. And like lots of other programming languages, or even not programming languages like Microsoft products, there's more than one way of doing things as well. So the hyperlinks can be a mixture of brackets often in Markdown specifically, and RMarkdown is an extension of it. So this is a bit squished because there's a lot of words in it, but the rounded brackets in this link are around the URL, which is to my website, actually. I'd forgotten about that. So if I just go to this, if I show you the code, because the code is a bit squished, isn't it? You can't really see it all. I'm just going to get rid of this section. So that's the top link. I can put that into the chat. And what we see here is in code, we can see everything listed out. So we're seeing this would be the, what would you call it? The text that appears in the report. As you can see here, it says course material. I'm just showing you here. So it says course material, but it doesn't show you the HTML detail behind it because that becomes the link itself. So that's also what it looks like as the example on the right. But if you did want the URL to be out, just clearly defined and written out, you just don't put brackets around your course material, and so it lists it out in its entirety. Thinking about it while I'm doing this, I wonder if we go to visual, you can see what it would look like as well. So here we can see, because I've got these brackets around it, it is its own what's it called? Oh, there we go. This is interesting. I've never done this because this is all visual and I get really lost with it, but you can change your links. So if you're very familiar with Microsoft Word, I think this is what this is emulating. You've got all this functionality here. Edit attributes. Oh, I've never gone into this bit. This is very interesting. You can do lots of things, and I didn't realize that. I'm sure there's code behind that you can do, but this is a nice entry into, and probably a bit better actually to do visual. Okay. Hyperlinks are reasonably straightforward, but we're going to use that hyperlink terminology and coding for something that you're more likely to use, I think, which is images. And that can be quite not confusing, but there's many options, and some of them are more powerful than others. Some of them are really, really quick, and some of them are really powerful. So with images, you might want to put in, for example, into a report, your trust image, your organization. You might have one for your team. You might have some things that you must always put into reports. And so you use images. And so I think images come into reports pretty quickly. This is an example of one. So on the left is the code. If I make it bigger, oh, that made it smaller. On the left is the code. So you can see it's in the text is above here. Competitive baking gets shown, pictured is in italics, I was going to say. So it's got these underscores on either side of it. And then the actual link is to the picture. So it's not become a link, it's just showing the picture. It's bringing it through from this short view of Bitly. It's a blue ribbon sponge. It's an example of things that I think we're quite familiar with if you've been to a couple of like village fetes and stuff. So you get awards for your Bake Off, and also if you've watched British Bake Off, of course. So that's how you can bring in a picture from the internet. But you can do a lot with HTML as well within RMarkdown, actually where the text fits as well. So it doesn't need to go into its own code section. You can mix it in with your text, which is very powerful. So it's the same image, the same code before it, the text, I should say, but we've got these things here which are distinctly HTML, and I don't really understand them, but they work. I think this is like image source, src is the source. So instead of the other bit, which was just square brackets, so it's exclamation mark, square brackets, brackets, and the brackets being where you put your URL. This one you write in a lot more around it, but we'll see in a little while how powerful it can be when you use HTML. As a third option, you can use knitr, and knitr is where we're using in these code chunks this section. Knitr is its own code area, saying this is an R bit. So you're using an R package to bring in graphics. I'm just going to copy this out to put it into this section here. Do we have images? Let's knit it, not ping it. Let's see if I can get my picture in there. So you see, I've just copied it directly and it's become its own. Oh, it broke because I don't think I've got the images in that section. No, that's my own. I need to change that. So it doesn't run, unfortunately, because the picture's not there. So it's not the code that's not working, it's just that there's no picture. But it's using this particular function called include graphics. And again, there's more functionality within knit R than if you just do basic RMarkdown, or Markdown, I should say. And this is the image that's missing from my thing. I'm not entirely sure why it's not there. I think I must have built it in the slides, but not in the data that I've shared with you. Is that okay for everybody? Because we're going to take it a step further to navigating around your folders, because if you're like we did before, which was quite interesting, when nothing was working and people couldn't get your files in the right code structure, I wanted you to have them, as they call it, in the root file. So all in this big section, as you go into your project, it's all in there, because if you have folder structures, you have to navigate the folder structures. We're going to cover that now, but it can be very frustrating if you have to try and go up a folder or down a folder to try and find the image or the document that you're looking for. So we're going to navigate some folders using pictures. And so if you're in the same folder, it's super easy. You just write, let me see if I get this right. So if I put this at the top of my code, let's make sure it runs, because I've been fiddling with it. And it didn't work with the picture that wasn't there. That runs, looks okay. Okay, so if I do a new line and, oh, actually, in a code chunk, which I haven't explained how to get yet, I'm going to not do that. I'm going to put that into an existing code chunk. Put it in here, let's say. Let's see if it works in here. I'm going to do an exclamation mark, square brackets, and then at the end of that, rounded brackets, and then do bakers1.png. Is it there? Oh, actually, no, it's not in the code. I am talking absolute nonsense. It needs to be in the text. Let's say that. Does it work? I really can't remember what I'm doing anymore. All of a sudden, I haven't drunk my tea, so it might be that that's doing it. Here we go. It didn't work because I don't think the picture's there. I'm in the wrong section. But I think that's not the example. That's why I've gone off track and I'm not in the right section. So that would be the same folder if it's there. I think it's actually in this section. Yeah, I'm in the wrong file. We're going to go through that in a few sections. I'd forgotten completely that it comes up in a slide. It's simple if you know what you're doing and if you're in the right document, but same folder, it's very straightforward in like, it's this section here where you just do an exclamation mark, square bracket and rounded bracket. You'll get a chance to do this in a second. The subfolder, I'm on track now, is the exact same sort of beginning part, but you need to tell it which folder you're going into. Now I've just gone into this folder to trigger my own memory because I'd forgotten 03 images, and in there you've got the bakers1_1.png, which is what we were supposed to be looking at, and the folder img, which is this section here. And the folders from a subfolder, and this is the bit that caught me out, and I think this is what I was thinking about as well, is going down your folder structures is really easy because you're referencing, I'm starting here and I want you to go there and I want you to go there. But when you're going up a level, that's when it can get really confusing, because how do you tell it to go up and then maybe sometimes up and around? And it's more about file pathways than it is about code as such, particularly R code. What we're doing in this section is telling it the folder structure, which is go up to the root level, I think it might be, and then go down another folder into finding your PNG files. So this is the confusing one. If your picture or the file or something that you're referencing isn't in the same folder and isn't in a subfolder, it's located elsewhere in your system. And we're going to have a go with this, using the right folder this time and the right file, so it will make more sense. Sorry, I really need to drink some of this tea. That might help. So where I was before, your main project has lots and lots and lots of files and folders, all sorts of, it's all jumbled together. And the one that you're trying to go into is 03-images, and that's a folder. So it's got a little folder icon on it. If you click on that, unless you're already there, you should have 4 things in there: 2 RMD files, 1 PMG picture, and another folder called IMG, short for images. And so together, rather than me just going off and doing some strange things, we're going to select the bake-off images.rmd because the one above it is the solution. So you're quite welcome to open that as well and have a look at things. And we're going to write in there, and it will work, the links to the picture in the same folder, one in a subfolder, and then go through what it's like to go and find it in the main root bit. And we'll be testing out the code on the previous slide. Now, this is also a nice opportunity to show how when you, let's see if it knits. I use RMarkdown a lot, not always to produce this kind of output file. I use RMarkdown as a workflow. So it gives my work structure, is really the flow that we're referring to here. So each of these code chunks can be run using the button. I don't know if I'll necessarily refer to this. I possibly will do again, which is okay. So if I run that chunk, it comes up, or if I put my mouse over it, the arrow, the green arrow to the right, it says run current chunk. And if I click on that, that will just load the 2 packages that I've got into that particular section. The other buttons give you other options to switch things on and off, which we will cover at a later point. And the next one to it, which is run all the chunks above, it might be that you're quite low down and you want everything to run before, because it won't run until you've got everything above it. But we can just do it chunk by chunk. So that's just loaded the packages. And the second chunk is getting the details of the working directory. So that tells you where we are, which is quite probably more useful if you're on a computer, tells you what you are. And you might see people writing set WD to set their working directory. Now that's deemed not good practice. And what we like to do, which is not obvious when you're on the cloud, is to use projects. Hands up if anybody is aware of projects or uses projects in R. Projects are really cool. 1 person. 2, 3. That's really good. Excellent. So that's brilliant, because projects are really useful and save a lot of, what do they call it? There's another word, like, there's a word, like, just if you're really messy like me, your projects can take up a lot of headspace, a lot of thinking about where you are, where you're going to, and then bookmarking it. And just to recap, I use this short menu because people might be aware of projects, but not necessarily know all of the different areas as well that you can do your project. So you can see I've got lots of projects, and I just flip between them and I can create new projects and open them. Just so that we don't go down that route, I will just find the project section in my Introduction to R and RStudio course thing that I also like to do, and share that link with people so that you can recap with it. So projects are really useful. No, I had that word and it went again. But this is telling you where your working directory is. So that can be quite helpful when you're also navigating around. The here package is another one, and I think I put that in there just to show you. So here is a nice function. It's a package, and this is a function together, and that tells you where the root is. So not necessarily where you are. So we're actually in this folder called 03-images. But if you wanted to know what the root of this project is, and this hinges on having projects, which the cloud is a bunch of projects. It doesn't let you work without them. The main root is cloud project in where we are. So I've kind of gone off a little bit just to explain some random bits about where things are and how to find out where you are. How, I suppose it's like map reading. Where am I in my folder structure? And I do get that a lot. So the markdown images links are just this simple structure of exclamation mark, square brackets, and rounded brackets. The rounded brackets being where your location is, your URL, or whether it's internal like this. If you put your cursor between the 2 rounded brackets and then do the return key, not return, tab, it's called tab, sorry, above your caps lock, the 2 arrows that way, returns on the other side, sorry. So your tab sort of does this drop down menu saying what's available to it. So you can see what you can see on the right, all the different files that we've got, the PNG files. And what's interesting is this is the folder, but bakers_2 is in the image folder. So it's giving you explicit, like, this is everything I can find, and this is a folder, and in the folder you can see this as well. So if I click on bakers_1.png, interestingly, I forgot this, I've got it set so it sets the code underneath. So if you run any code, it runs into the script, so you see it down below. Now that's quite nice for images. So as soon as it finds it, it shows you the image that it would be. And that's the nice image you can see. Is everybody okay with that one? So if you do exclamation mark, open square bracket, it closes it, rounded square bracket, it closes it. And another way to find your information, so I could just tab it and get all my information and just choose one. Or I can start typing out my folder name. So I'm going to do image and then / and then tab it. And I've only got one option in there, so it fills it in for me. So that's nice as well. And if I scroll down, you can see the image works in my folder structure, which is quite a nice one, where they're actually baking. Now the subfolder one, if I can get down, I can never make it. So I need to do return. Oh, by doing return, it gets rid of the picture, doesn't it? Never mind. So if I do square bracket, and what I'm looking for is dot. I'm just going to see if it's on there. Right, it's dot. So what I'm trying to do is go up. This dot is actually represented in this section here. Oh, when I do that, it makes it small. So just above your files, you can see an arrow going up, pointing like you're going up your file, and there's dot there. So I think that's the same dot. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm assuming it is. So I'm saying go up the file. So we're seeing it by working around. And now I want to go to images and then type in images. Well, actually, if I do tab, it gives me all of the options that I've got, but it tells me everything. So not just pictures. So if I go to images and then tab it again, then I've only got one option with the PNG. If I scroll down, I can see the picture. So if I share that with you, those 3 bits of code, actually, then you can see the pictures, hopefully, in your R script. So the first one, just to recap, is really easy. The information is in the same. If I, oops, oh, it's squished all together. Sorry, the return didn't work in Zoom chat. The first one is just, you want your file is with your picture. That's really easy. The second one is it's in a subfolder. That's quite easy because you can see it. But the third one is going up and around and down. And the key point is 2 dots. Tab is also nice to do so that you can see what it can see. Any questions on that? Has anybody else had any other experiences with that as well? Took me a long time and I still get confused. Navigating is not my strong point generally, so it doesn't really work out in code either. Now the next slides are about alt text. Images can break, I'm pretty sure, and they're not there sometimes, so it just runs, but it goes, no, what's this? It's gone, particularly for URLs, web images, the page might go. And an alt text is useful for people who use screen readers, but it's really useful when your image goes. Then it doesn't look like there's just this broken link anymore. It says what was supposed to be there. So the image here should have been a picture of a sponge cake from a village competition. And now you can read what was intended, but for some reason it's broken. And that just helps it a little bit. It's a nice sideline, but alt text is really useful for people who rely upon screen readers and not visual representations of things. And how we can do that, how we can use it, is just to extend this section here between the 2 square brackets in Markdown. So if I write alt text picture of a TV, when I knit that, just to sort of show the Markdown, it actually shows up underneath in the alt text, which is no bad thing, because then you get some examples. It can be an explanation of the picture or of a chart, which is quite nice. It's always good to explain the picture directly rather than add any further meaning to it, just as a person would view it. That's I think the sentiment that's coming across from people who I follow on Twitter when they want to see what the GIFs are. They just want to see what it is that you see, not necessarily your interpretation of it. So that's a terrible alt text, but really it's a picture of a TV with some monsters on it. So just being descriptive. And so if the picture broke, then I can get that alt text popping up as well, which is why it's quite useful to have those things. Markdown is very simple, very easy just to type it out. If you use HTML or want to use it, you can type that one out as well. Not so easily, there's more code around it, but it does exactly the same thing. So this is bringing through the source code of the URL, again with the blue ribbon sponge, but with alt text underneath it. It's a bit more explicit in that you can write alt equals. And knitr as well, not to be left out, it also does fig.alt, so it does its own alternative text too. My favorite option of all of these three, well, I've got two really. The Markdown is really quick, so you're just doing like 3 or 4 characters, and then suddenly you've got the setup for your link. So that's quick. But when you want to change your figure options, like you want to make them bigger or smaller or centered or off to the left or off to the right, I haven't seen how Markdown can do that at all. So that's when it gets a bit more restricted. And then you might want to move to knitr or HTML. So with captions, so we've got alt text, which is the alternative text, but you might also want to put in a caption. You can do that as well. So it's interesting because I think alt text is coming through like a caption now, but I think they used to be separated. And you can put both in. So this is a bit bigger, I think. Let me just try that. Let's see if that fits in there. Let's see how it differs between alt text and caption. So I've put in a chunk just to give it some space so that you can see that it's slightly grayed behind it. Let's see if that knits. So the first image I've got has got the alt text, and that didn't come through, did it? So we've got captions. Oh, alt text. Did alt text go on that one? Did I not? Ah, all of a sudden alt text is not showing. So it's in there, I guess, but hidden behind the image, which is what I would expect, but it seemed to have come out when we first did that. But the caption always comes out. So it's a bit like a caption in a book when you've got your chart and it will say this is a chart from Florence Nightingale from the Crimea War or something like that. It will have the caption underneath it. So fiddling around with those are quite fun and can be very useful. Resizing your image as well, you have a lot more capability within your knitr function. So in this bit here, which I will explain a bit more in terms of our Markdown as well, but this is where knitr is running. So if I put out width equals in string 50%, knit that. I'm hoping it will shrink it. That looks like a shrinking and it haven't worked out very well on there. It's because I've done sponge, isn't it? No, picture of a sponge cake. Out width equals 50%. I'm not sure why that's not worked. Let's try the whole thing. Let's move that there. Ooh, try that. Yep. I might have done something in the one before and it is huge. Oh, there we go. It's small. I was looking at the wrong one. Oh, it's because I've copied it. I've copied it twice. Ah, so it's gone smaller. So you have more capability because when you work with images, trying to get them right, sometimes I go out to programs like Paint or there's something 3D in Microsoft, or GIMP is a free software that it sounds awful, but our trust has allowed us to have, which means we can change a few things, quite fancy things for HTML, web design and stuff. But this gives you a nice quick way of controlling it within your RMarkdown. So you don't have to do image changes and then bring them back in. You can center it as well. So before it was like shoved over to the left, like it was text, and you might want it smaller and then centered. And you've got this figure alignment again using knit-r. And although I haven't done it actually in there, I think all of those can also be written in HTML, but I've just relied upon knit-r to keep it in the R function. But if you like HTML or you want to learn a bit more about it, I think is W3 Schools is a really good resource for lots of things like Python. It says there, I just saw HTML, and you can do things with SQL as well. Also has like little vignettes. So if I do, let me see, opacity, CSS opacity. So you want to change how transparent the picture is. You've got the code here in CSS. Actually, that's another coding language. So that was just the possibilities are quite good with W3. Lots of, it's like a glossary. Anyway, before we go off onto other languages, is that okay with everybody with all the different possible? There are many, many more possibilities with knit-r and images than I've shown, but it's just part of its possibility. Okay, I'm taking silence as a good thing. Please do ask if there's anything you go, well, that doesn't make sense, or it's broken on my computer. Please interrupt me. That's absolutely fine. Hyperlinks. So these are images and they're showing you the images, but one of the early things I like to do is make my image a hyperlink itself, because it just feels like I need to click it. And again, Markdown doesn't quite do that. When you I'm not sure if you can see it, or you can only really reference a word to be an image. I don't think I've ever worked out. If I'm wrong, please do let me know how to do this. But Markdown doesn't seem to make the photo itself. I have to put a word in there, which is okay. But if you want this cake to be clickable, you're better off with HTML. And when I looked at HTML, I'm not going to do that because I'm not sure if the picture works. I'm not sure. I'm not going to run it in my own code because I'm not sure if my blue ribbon sponge cake works. I'm not sure. This, if I put my mouse over it, over the cake, as I was like wanting to, I've now got a hyperlink image. And if I click on that, I get to philosophy, because of course, if you have cake, you need to go to philosophy with your cake. I studied philosophy, everything relates. If you didn't know, in Wikipedia, it seems that if you click on the first link on any Wikipedia page as you go through them, you'll end up at philosophy. So that's the tenuous tie between cake and philosophy, because eventually we'll get down to the esoteric nature of cakes probably through that. The bit here again, you'll see that source, which is the picture, which is the blue ribbon, but the href is the HTML reference, and that's different. So it doesn't have to be to the same reference, which is why it took you to philosophy. So there's a lot more capability and power within HTML. Right, a little quiz. In the chat, I just want to see if you remember. Don't worry if you don't, it's okay. How you would add headers. One of the options that's not here is to look at the visual, actually, to be fair. But in code, how would you add headers in Markdown? Is it an exclamation mark, a hyphen, a hashtag, or one dot? In the chat, what would be the option? Only one is the answer. Is that right? Yeah, only one is the answer. Just have to double check. Coming in thick and fast. Hashes. There are only 4 of us now. I lost somebody. That was a bit unfortunate. But yes, you're all right. They're all hashes. But what about lists? Okay, let's start with lists. Bulleted lists, this is, first of all. I forgot there are 2 options. A bullet list would be what symbol? Yes, oh yeah, because David used the one before. Yes, it's the hyphen. And it can also be an asterisk, which isn't on there as well. So you might have preferred an asterisk and been like, oh, it's always an asterisk, but where is it? It's not there. It's a hyphen as well. And numbered, bit of a clue there because there's a 1, brilliant. But with a dot, marvelous. You remembered the dot. Yeah, it's good. Well done. Thank you for that. Thanks for that little bit. Next section. Let's see where we're up to with the sections. We have, code chunks. And then I think, if you don't mind, if I'll just go through them all, let me go to the end, just to double check. Oh no, that's section. I'm just checking to see when lunch is because I couldn't remember the options. Oh, maybe it's not that one. Okay, code chunks. Let's go back over there. So the code chunk sections, if I go back to the bake-off report, we've mentioned briefly this grey box thing being the chunks, and chunk is a new word as well. The thing about R for me was that there were lots of words that relate to R, and sometimes they cross over with other languages like the SQL language that I came from, and sometimes they're completely separate or they have different meanings, and talk about knitting and rendering and chunks, lots of new language. So I've gone back to the script as it says, so I am following my own slides. We might want to create a new chunk, and what I didn't do before was show you that because it was a bit confusing. I knew this slide was coming. If we go to the very end of this script, around 54, you might have a few more or fewer lines. I'm back into the black here, so that's into the text area. There are two ways of, well, there's one way, code-wise. Most people are on Windows machines, but there is an option here for Mac. If you're on a Mac, that's really quite cool, but most people have Windows machines when they're at work, their option. And the shortcut key is Control, Alt, and I to create just a blank R chunk, as it's called. The other chunk you can create, actually, it doesn't say it on there, is to go up to this C, which is a green C on the top of the editor, near the run, and actually near my other tab. And if you select that, you get a short list. R is always at the top, but if you are interested, there are some other languages that you can bring into your RMarkdown. I particularly like bringing in SQL because I use SQL, and so I can bring it into R and work alongside R within my chunks in my workflow. But if you just wanted to use your mouse, click on there and then select R for the short list, or it's Control, Alt, and I. You can run your chunks, as I did mention, so I'm going over this bit again, but that's no problem at all, where you've got the green arrow to the right, and you can run your chunks within your script, but you must have that data loaded. So if I just show you, although this runs, let me see, so I'm knitting it. When I knit it, it makes sure the entirety of the script runs to produce the report. But if I were to run separate sections of this, oh, that did actually load it. I wasn't expecting it to. Let me just clear that, sorry. There's a little brush, actually, that's quite a useful thing to know to clear your objects in your environment. So if I clear that and then try and run this section without any code data, it won't run because I haven't run, I did, but then I deleted it, the code above it. So they must go in order. But once you have that loaded, you can run it out. You can just run each section as you go through using that arrow to the right. Because, let's get rid of it again, delete that. When I said before, there was this button here that said run everything before because it needs to be in order. So if I press the green button, it doesn't run because it doesn't have the data. I've not loaded it. If I use the gray arrow with the green bar next to it instead, that's saying run everything above. That loads everything, and now when I go back, because it doesn't run the one that you're in, click the green one, it does run because I've run everything above sequentially. It's all very sequential, and I'm sure there's a slide about that as well. So there is a knit button, which, as you say, runs everything to a report, but you can run everything. I think you can do that using the run button, which is next to the chunk. You can do select certain parts or run the entirety of them. Run certain lines, which is like in your R script where you do Control and Enter if you like your keyboard shortcuts. You can do your current chunk. I always forget these ones actually. It's Control, Shift, and Enter, so just the one you're in. So you can use your mouse or keyboard shortcuts essentially, and you can run all of them, and you can do all sorts of options, to be fair. Default code chunk, which is what we had at the bottom down here, just to copy this and see what you get. Let's see if that works. I'm going to just knit it. Let's see if it works in the knit. I'm not sure. It should knit. Yeah, it does. But I'm going to show you on the slide as well. So this is what you'll see in your code script as well when you knit it. So you have no detail options in there. So if you just have a look just slightly above, you've got all this kind of code script. We'll go into detail about what each of these mean. But if you just do your plain first R chunk, you get a lot of information. So what we're doing is running the code. So it's a dplyr code with the pipes in there. So we're taking data called ratings, filtering it by series 1 and finding the top 1 viewers 7 days or something. Yeah, so it's top 1. I've not used top 1 before. I didn't realize that. Just 1 of viewers 7 day, I think. What you get as your output is your code is repeated and your output in kind of like that console look where you get all the kind of like symbols to the left of it. And when you create an object, as you might be familiar, I hope, with R scripts, when you name your object. So before we just had, this is code, this is the output. If you named that object, in this case, we call it top viewers, what do you think would happen? Let's just see if we can give you a bit of a like a test there. It's giving you a couple of seconds so I can drink my tea as well. So the slide gives you the answer. You just get your code. It just tells you your code. It doesn't give you the output because you haven't called your output. So if I put that into that chunk and knit it, I'll put that into the chat as well. So hopefully you can copy that. If I scroll down, can I scroll down? No, that's it. You just see the code itself, but you don't see the output because you've outputted it to an object and you have not called that object again. Like you would have to in a script, you'd have to either write it or run it in the editor or put it into the console to run. So you'd have to write, let's see if it's on that one, top viewers. So you'd have to call it again like this. And then you get both the code and the output like you got before when you didn't actually create the object. Okay. And so the question with this one is when you extend your code chunk, what is going on with this chunk? Let's have a look to the output. I'm just going to get rid of that, pop that in. And see what happens. What is going to happen? Sorry, not what is happening. What is going to happen? What you might have guessed, because I've just opened it up, is you see your code, as you did with the other ones. And on this occasion, seeing the data, because it's a ggplot, you see a chart, which is actually the very same one as above. So you're getting both bits all the time. And it's one of the frustrations that I had initially with the default example, the template, because you get your code as well as your output, and you don't always want to share the code depending on who the audience is. If they are analysts, then yeah, they might be really keen to see the code, but if they're managers, they'll be like, what does this mean? What's ggplot? Why am I seeing this? Before we go down the route of explaining how to switch on and off these things, I'm going to talk about navigating the chunks, because as we navigated before using the outline between the headers, which was really useful to kind of move along and up and down. This is a really short report, but if you can imagine a really, really long one, that can be useful. You can also do that with the chunks. And when you click on it says ratings here, because is that where I am at the moment? I think that's the name of the, that's the name of the, it's hyphened, isn't it? So it's the header. You can see chunks 3 and 4. So you can navigate between the chunks more easily, which is really good for long code scripts. It doesn't say that, but you can name the chunks as well. Oops, I'll just let somebody in. You can name the chunks as well. So default always sets it to 3 and 4. You know, it just counts on and on and on. But I think that might be for a later one. So controlling the output, we're going to go back to these chunk options. Essentially, we're going to build it up so that we can get rid of that code, but step by step to show you a few other things as we go along. So if I just take this code, glimpse ratings, share that with you so that you can have a go. Knit. Glimpse is a function that gives you this output, so you can just see. Actually, I think you can see what you would see if you extended your button here in the top right with your environment with ratings. You can see the same information. It's a bit squashed on my screen, but that's what you can see in your code. So I guess that button is really a glimpse button. And so you get what we'd expect because there's nothing really set. It's just default R. You get the code and you get the output, and you get all this kind of output that looks like a console. If we say echo equals false, now that's coding it, but if you wanted to do it in the chunk, there's a cog wheel. So if you click on the cog wheel, you can name the chunk in there. So if I do that as like ratings, now we can see I've got a name in there. It sort of updates it as we go along, and it's show output only. You get the same code. So it's trying to put it into more useful English, plain English context, as opposed to echo equals false, show output only. And when you do that, if I do apply, it doesn't change my code. But what if I run it? If I just click that button as well, that's inside the code. So that's not really quite the same. If I knit it, what we're trying to see is this output on the right, which you'll see through the knit. You no longer see the code in your final report. You only see the output. Just as I did that, I didn't really realize when I use this as a workflow, you don't see the code output because it's already above. So it's not going to show you it twice. But what you will see is the output section in your code bit, so you can work with it. So unfortunately, I tend to work as workflow, and I always forget how it would look if I ran it as a report, because I feel like they're two mindsets really. I'm using it as like step by step, keep my work in a consistent fashion, and many more people use it as an output report, which is why I got a bit confused there. Eval is short for evaluate. So it says evaluate equals false because I think it's set to true as default. And so what you get is just it runs, so evaluates it. Let me just see if I can guess what the code would be here. I'm not sure if it has any English here. So the chunk options are, how would they write it? Evaluate means run this to make sure it works. So if I put evaluate equals false, but then break my code by not writing the correct name for the output, it will knit because it's not being checked to see if it works. It's not being evaluated. I don't get anything at the bottom, but it still runs. If I set it to evaluate equals true, and this is why I'm a bit stuck because I don't know what the English would be for this, plain English, it will break because rating, not ratings, doesn't exist. So that's really good in the context of, say, you've got an example and you're showing some SQL code, but you're not connected to your SQL server and you want to do select star from a date table, say, but you don't want it to really run. You don't want it to go, does this work? Yes, it works. I'll give it to you because you're not connected to your SQL server. Eval equals false means that you can show the code without it being evaluated. Include. Now, include always catches me out. And thankfully, I've written myself a bit more of an example with it. So include often fits at the top, the very first chunk you have. Is it often the setup one? There are some options within it. So I think, oh, that's results, sorry. Include is, oh, it doesn't say. Include equals false. So you kind of like, you always find it at the top of your setup. Let me see if I've got my presenter notes. There we go. Often seen at the top of the code, it prevents the results from appearing. So it's quite important when you're using things like tidyverse. You get these messages and other things. It doesn't include it. It's available to the code, but it's not included in the report. And that's why you'll find it at the top. If I go to the template one, you can see it says include equals false. Is that right? Include equals false. Yes, so include I'll just go back to those presenter notes. False prevents the code and results from appearing in the finished result. Ah, okay. RMarkdown still runs the code. Ah, so you really need all of this setup stuff and the libraries. I always get confused by this. I just always do it and then never really question it. It's like when you do your PIN number and then someone says, what's your PIN? You're like, I just know how to move my hand. I can't remember the numbers anymore. That could just be me, but that's how it is for me with include equals false. Results equals hide or hold or as is another one. Crops up occasionally, and we will use that later, well, tomorrow in an example. It has these various options. Often you don't really need to even write about results equals, but sometimes it's really important to have results as is. So those are the examples. It's important, but I'm not going to go into it too much because I'll be here for a bit trying to work it out as I speak. There's an example tomorrow which will be very clear. Messages and warnings. If you've used Tidyverse, you'll know it comes out with all of this interesting information about what's loaded and why it's loaded and how it could be, it's masking, isn't it? Conflicts, there could be conflicts, but you don't really want that to appear in your report when you show that to, say, managers or service people who won't understand that at all. So you can suppress, as it says, the wet messages and the warnings. And I think if you look at the cog in that one, you can toggle, as it's called, your warnings. So you can go from true, so you do include it, false, you don't, and the middle one is default, which is to include it, I think. Is that right? Let me have a look. I think I'm looking at the default. You don't get it, actually. That's interesting. I can't remember what the default is, but I'm going to go to the bake-off, actually, not the other one, and I'm going to show warnings, switch those off, switch it off, and switch off the messages as well, so that you don't get messages. I really can't use my mouse. This is why I think I always stick to codes, because my mouse didn't work. It's mainly me, I think. So chunk options summary, just to highlight, we do need it to be curly brackets. So you've got different brackets within R, and in this context with RMarkdown, the curly brackets are the important things with the options going inside them. I'm just going to make sure that runs now. You can do more than one option, which is a bit like the dplyr things. I think I've broken that one, haven't I? I have. That's okay. By using commas between them. Yep, that worked. Good. And you can see here that's the name, comma, and then an option. And you can do more options as you go along. I think actually this one's got quite a few, hasn't it? It's got echo equals false, warning equals false, and message equals false. And you must be careful. The R part is called the R code engine. So this is all R. So if you wanted to use SQL, you need to use its own code chunk area. You can't, I think, well, you can, but it uses other packages, mix and match them. But this is R. This is like a mini script in your RMarkdown. And it's not like HTML, which can work in your text as well, just directly. Okay, there is a slide about naming chunk labels, but before we go on, does anybody have any questions about all of those chunk options that you can have in knitr? Excuse me, well, my phone is just going to keep blobbing at me because I have a message. So if I just get rid of that. Right, naming chunk labels. We did that, but I'm going to do it again because it's really useful to see. I like actually that I discovered, because I always forget that you can do that in that little cog and do that. It makes it quite nice to, you can just name your chunk straight away in there, which is nice and friendly. Or you can write that directly into your code. So if I do, I might just copy these actually. Peak. And if I run that, you can see it hasn't really affected it. It just now peaks, which is the glimpse code. You get the code and you get the data output. And to get a new chunk, it's Control Alt and I, just to remind you to do a new R or use this chunk button at the top for the short menu. And if I write head, which takes the first, I think it's the first lines, ratings. If I just run that in the chunk to show you, it's the top 8. It's default to 8. But if I also call that peak, you can see here it's changed it on the chunk name. So the chunk 4 is called peak, chunk 5 is peak. And if I knit it, the problem is it won't knit because they're both the same chunk. You've really called your R script the same name in a sense, and it gets confused. So you must be careful and call it something like peak 2. And then when I run it, and I still get caught out by that quite a lot. If I copy a chunk and then do another one and forget to change the name, it fails, and that's quite a common thing. And the error isn't that clear. So you can see I've got the code for glimpse now and the code for head. So if I look at if I get rid of that and do my error, actually, if I go back, the error does say duplicate. Actually, I take that back. It is a bit clearer. It's just got lots of other stuff around it, like pass block, whatever that means, which can be a bit overwhelming. But in there, it says, just look at your duplicate label. A good chunk label. It's interesting because some of these I thought didn't work, but it's not, they all work, but they conventionally avoid it. So I thought at first things like my plot with a space in it wouldn't work, but it does. So if I put my peak, it will run, but conventionally it's no spaces appear in the names of things in R. So it just runs, it's fine. So the kind of like the systems that we've got here. So this first one is kebab case. I knew there was a name. So it's got a hyphen between the words, and that's really common in RMarkdown. It doesn't work at all in an R script, but it is very common for these chunk names to put a hyphen between them. I use that a lot, so it's all lowercase with a hyphen. You can do, this one's called camel case, where it's all lowercase for the first word, and then thereafter each word is capitalized at the beginning. Pascal case is where it's all capitalized at the beginning, which is nice to read as well. We've agreed on that for our scripts in our team because that helps particular people so that they can read it, because it doesn't always make sense to have it all lowercase. Like NHS together would be like, it's a bit ups and down, really, isn't it? It doesn't really fit. And that's a repetition, really. My plot 1 with the kebab case with it, just showing that you can go further. You don't have to just do 2 words. You can fit together 2 or 3 words. Just to go through the bad, as in conventionally avoided, still work. Underscore is avoided. So I do use that a lot. Snake case, as it's known, in scripts and in naming my files. You saw that I called, if I go back, it says here my report. I do use snake case a lot, but it's not used a lot within the chunk. Sorry. Spaces are avoided. All squashed together with just all lowercase. It's hard to read, and it's very difficult to read for people with screen readers, but it's quite difficult for other people. You know, when people do hashtags and it just is like a really long string of just lowercase words, difficult to read. All capitals as well can be quite tricky because there's no space between them, and if you're using a screen reader, apparently it reads it out like it's an acronym, so it will be MYPLOT, which could be very annoying. And my plot, again, capitalized, even though it's kebab, it's still capital. Capital seems to be a bit shouty and people avoid it, but they all work. So it's up to you whether you use them or not. I think the thing that I say in the Introduction to R&R Studio course is valid here. Just be consistent in your approach. Now, the setup chunk is the really important bit with the includes equals false. It has a lot of things going on in it. The setup chunk here, it isn't called setup. I haven't called it that, but you can do, just so that it's quite obvious to you and you can navigate to it. It's usually the very first one because it's the global setting as well. So you can set up all of the options that you've got. So this is saying knitr, which is the package. It's kind of like a file pathway to the function, which is ops chunk setting. Some options that I don't really understand all of them, but I have seen that a lot at the top of the screens. I think the comment, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's just a standard comment, and out width is that your pictures will be all at they'll just be match like for like. I need to look up what collapse equals true, I must admit. It's where the setup chunk is often set to includes equals false. But it's also really useful, for example, if you wanted all your code to be switched off, so you want your echo equals false, you can set that up in that global chunk so you don't have to repeat it for every single chunk thereafter. We're going to set up the chunk, and you can try that out yourself as well and try out with some of the figures that you can save. I think I'll just add to this bit because it didn't say that on the next slide. I have done this where, say for a presentation slide, I've switched on the chunks to show my code, and then for some of them switch them off. So you have that option of going, this is globally the setting, don't include any code whatsoever. That's probably the most normal actually. But for these ones, just show the code sample. And so you're switching them on and off when you require them. So you try to have it set for the global setting and then switch on and off for individual ones rather than repeat yourself. So we're going to add the setup chunk, and we're going to do that together. We're going to add fig.path equals figs / because what that does is save your files, your images, your plots to a particular folder, which is really useful rather than going into individual ones, which you may have seen in the Introduction to R&R Studio course. And we're going to knit and behold, it says. So this is good. Let's have a go with this one. We'll do this together, will we? Right. I can't remember how to do this off the top of my head, so I'm going to look at the example here. That's another way of looking at the template. So I'm going to put that above the packages setup, and it's already got everything set out, and I'm going to share that with you so that you can, in a sense, cheat too. There you go. So that's a nice way of using the template. So the template has everything echo equals true, and I don't want that one. I want echoes equals false. So if I knit my code now, my report, I just get my results. But what I want to do is add fig path. I think I'm missing a slide in this actually, because I'm thinking, how did I do this? Let's do figs / and then knit. It's good. It's working. The report's fine. It hasn't changed the report. But now at the very bottom of your files, because it's new, I have a folder called figs. So if I just copy that for you, I'll copy the entire thing into the chat and then select that folder, figs. We can see unnamed chunk 2. And we can see our chart. So it's a really nice way of getting all of the charts out in one go. The reason why it says unnamed chunk 2 is because if I scroll down to the ggplot2, there's no name for it. So if I do a plot and I call it my beautiful plot and then apply that and then knit, I've now got a copy of it under my beautiful plot 1. So it's taken the chunk name for it. If you take away, oh no, I think that might be the next slide. Yeah, I want you to have a go. Just to make sure that's made sense to everybody and you've got that folder and it's done what you expected, hasn't broken at any point. This is brilliant. No breaking. I'm surprised. Technology usually gets in the way of this. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to have a go at labeling some of the code chunks yourselves. I'll just be quiet. I'll be here. Set up this chunk, which I've shared, but have another go with it and have a go with removing that / and just see what happens. Just remove it, knit it, what happens? And navigate using the pane. Have a go with the outline and the setup chunk bits down here. Well, it says setup now, looking through there, and I'll just be quiet, give you the space to think for 3 minutes. Okay, you'll be pleased to know after a few of these slides, that will be the end of this, and you can have lunch, and then we can just regroup tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow for the morning. So it's not too much longer to go. You've been working really hard at this, and there's a lot to take in. Hope any questions from any of that? Did anything break? It should have broken. I did say to remove that, and let me just remind myself what happens. I think when you remove the / for the fig path, the report's fine, just runs. But then you start to get all of this, it sort of merges it, it calls it fix my beautiful plot at the bottom. So if you had several, they would all appear in your root because you're not telling it a path. So there you go, sort of broken. It works, but it's in the wrong place. But it's good to try these things out. Always knit it, see what happens, see if it works. And hopefully you had a go with the chunks and the outlines and had a look round without me talking over you. There's the answer. Ooh. There was a few more things added in there that I didn't do actually, which was to show warnings. Let's switch those off with my mouse work. And there we go. I don't think that has any noticeable effect actually, because I don't think they were coming through anyway on the messages. But it just sort of fixes it so that it doesn't appear, just in case. Right, reusing chunks. So a nice thing to do, it says we'll reopen this, but we've opened this file. We will name chunk 3 under the ratings, this one, which I called my beautiful plot. Ooh, I've called it my beautiful plot. I'm going to rename it with viewers by days. And you can copy along with me as well, by days. So I'm going to apply that. And the reason why I wanted to, well, I'm keeping it just so that it matches this, but a nice reason for having names for your chunks is to navigate through them, but you can also refer back to them. So there's my chart. I'm going to remove these 2 bits of code at the bottom because it's a bit messy. I'm going to select the C chunk up here and get the short menu, select R, so it gets this new code chunk. And in there, I'm going to, rather than write some more code, so previously we've got the chart. I've got the chart and the code actually. I can't remember, sorry. What do we get? I could probably have read the code. We just get the chart. I could have read the code actually thinking about it. What I want now is the chart. I want the chart switched off, but the code instead. So I can refer back to it rather than copying it and pasting it and then having 2 chunks to then change. If I change maybe the data name, I can do a ref label. I'm not sure I need that comma that's between the sections, but I'm going to try it anyway and just see if it works. Ref label equals viewers by days. So that's the name of the plot, and I put it in quotation marks, and I think that can either be double or single quotation marks. If I knit it just as it is, I should get the plot repeated, which I do. I said that just as it appeared though. Probably just catch that in a couple of seconds, go, yeah, you saw it first. So if I say echo equals true and knit, then I get my code on the second option. And then if I add in eval equals false, meaning don't run the code. Not that it's broken in this case, it's just that I don't want the chart. So I don't want it to be evaluated. I don't want it run. Have I run the knit? Let's try again. I didn't click the knit. Here we go. Now I get the chart at the top and the same code is run underneath, but output code. So I don't need to copy it and paste it and then maintain 2 lots of code, which is really nice because all I've done is refer to the label above. I was using the knit button for it. Yep, I was just checking my slide to make sure I'd filled in everything. So I've done that with slides, and that's really useful. Is that okay for everyone? Do you want the code chunk? I'll give you the code chunk. If you've named it the same name, this will work but you might need to change that reference label to the other code chunk, depending on what you called it. You might have called it My Beautiful Plot. And I'm going to give you another 5 minutes to have a go. Lunch is soon, don't worry. I want you to have a go, I think is the same thing. If you have already had a go, maybe you did it with me thinking about it, but I want you to then, there's a little bit extra when you get to 4. So have a go with that one and take what we've just done together, if you did do it with me, to 4 and 5. I'll be quiet. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Zoe, you're on mute.
I was just saying the usual thing anyway. Thank you for that. I do appreciate it. Anybody have any issues or anything that cropped up that you wanted to share? I was just saying this is the last slide as well. So I will go through it step by step, but was there anything that came up, or did anybody discover anything as you were given that time? Thanks for the mute notice though. That's a classic, isn't it, in these things online? Somebody had to do it and it had to be me. I'm going to go through this myself now. So in the chunk viewers by days, which I've just named, I'm going to add, following the instructions now, fig dot, you get these drop down options, fig.cap. So you probably did this anyway. So I'm just going to do in quotation marks, nice chart. It doesn't do like in R, you open quotation, it does it on the end for you, unfortunately. But if I knit that one, see what happens. It says nice chart underneath it, but I've got my code down here. So the problem with the code is that I was just bringing through the echo equals true. So if I just get rid of echo equals true and false, just refer to the chart. Oh, actually, because it was saying underneath what to do, I've now got the repetition of the chart, but without the caption, it doesn't come through on the second option. So you probably, if you were following this correctly, created a new chunk and put in there just the reference labels, but I just cut out the bit that I did before to show you how I switched it so it would only show the code and not the chart. Now, if I do opt, is it opts dot label equals true and knit, see what happens. I now get the I'd forgotten about that. The caption comes through. So just bringing through the same chunk just brings through the chart, but no captions or anything. But if I do ops equals true, it brings the same options through. Opt label, I mean options, ops label. But if I want to change it, can I just write fig.cap afterwards? Let's see if that overwrites it. I can't remember if it overwrites it. Duplicate, chart, exclamation mark. And then close it. Let's see what happens. It might override it, and it does. I get duplicate chart. I'm just going to try this removal of ops label because I can't remember if that has an effect. I'm just playing around with this now. Knit, 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 knit. Mouse work's not working. And yes, it doesn't need it. So I think what was happening from my little experiment there was that the fig.cap was overwriting the options that were coming through before. So the point should always be, try it, see what happens, knit it, knit frequently, make changes, always see what they look like. And although it says time for lunch, you can take a bit longer. So this session has ended for today. We're going to reconvene tomorrow for the second half of the day, as it would have been if we were doing the full day, where we're going to do a bit more about code side of the RMarkdown. So is there any questions at all? We seem to have been spared some of the technological issues except for the very early bit, and the Shiny app bit. Brilliant. Okay, it's looking good. Hope you can make it tomorrow. If you can't, I think we'll still record it so you can catch up later, and it will be on YouTube for you to have access to. Great. Oh, and before you go, if people are not already aware, there's the NHSR Slack group where people can help out with any issues that you have with RMarkdown, and also it's full of other NHS and social care analysts who can answer sort of like general questions, topic questions as well. So if you're not aware of that, I'll try and share that with people as well, because you probably, like me, really want to go off and get your lunch now. So I won't hold you any longer. Thank you so much for coming, and I do hope I get to see you tomorrow.
Thanks very much, Zoe.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.